I met with the guy who was Reagan's former budget director, and he said, "What do you think the problem is?" And I said, "Look, I'm really reluctant to say because you've forgotten more about how things work than I'll ever know. I'm just a market guy." And he said, "Yeah, well, what do you think the problem is for the markets?" And I said, "Well, the problem is we elect lawyers, and they don't have to be good lawyers. As long as they know how to make a soundbite that makes them sound like statesmen, we vote for them. And we send them to Washington with a rule book and say, we're your constituents, look out for us, and read the rule book and use your lawyerly powers. And then we find out, after they get there, that we're not their constituents. Their constituents are the guys that gave them the money to make the sound bites." And I remember him looking at me saying, "You don't even know how right you are. And these people are bought before they ever get to Congress."
Hey everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness, the place where we discuss the madness that occurs when economics, politics, and personalities all move in different directions. It's the last day of January, all right, last trading day of January. First month is over. We've had some crazy swings, gold, silver, metals. Now we're starting to see oil, the dollar. A lot of things going on this morning, Tim. What do you think?
Well, it's hard to put a finger on exactly what's driving this. There's so many big cross currents. We're at a juncture in a lot of places. One of the things that nobody seems to be talking about with respect to financial markets, and I made this point, I guess, last week, was when you're talking about insurrections and governmental instability, that's not a good environment to invest. And I really think that's a factor. Nobody seems to be playing up on it, but you're talking about states in open insurrection. And it's more than one. I mean, Minnesota is the focal point, but you've got state governments and local municipal governments in open revolt against the federal government, and people are talking about the supremacy clause. And we tend to look at the U.S. as a very stable country, and if you're here inside it, you think it is. But if you're outside it, it really doesn't look that way. So I think that's one of the factors that's been weighing on the dollar, and to a lesser extent of maybe gold. But there's other bigger factors that's driving that. I mean, I may be making a small point here, but it's really not a small point. It's a significant point, just in relative terms when you look at everything else that's going on, invading Venezuela, Iran hanging out there.
It's not geopolitical risk, it's neopolitical risks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this week has just been gold going up 300-400 bucks, coming down 300-400 bucks. I was talking to people earlier this week. I'm saying this is historic, seeing this stuff, and something's got to break.
Yeah, in 2 days it moved 500 points up. That's a
Yeah,
1 year move.
yeah. And one of these markets is very wrong. Either the equity market's going to collapse because people are divesting out of the U.S., divesting out of the dollar. People don't trust the dollar policies, whatever. Or the metal markets is just running far ahead of itself. I agree. I think something's going to break, and to me, I think the equity market's overvalued in a big way.
Hmm. Well, um, I'll tell you how I've been playing it. I pick a couple of stocks that I think are ugly, and I play them from the short side, either with puts or writing calls or just outright getting short. Um, but there's stuff that I'm willing to take drawdowns with that I think are good long term. So sometimes I come in like today, and I look at the book, and the book is down a little bit, but a lot of my short term plays are doing very well. And I think the reactions are overblown. Did you see what they did to Microsoft the other day? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a great stock. And I went and I bought some calls on that. I bought some in the money, deep in the money calls. So, I'm just playing it for a couple of days swing, but not more than that because you're going to be suffering a big drawdown. So you buy a 5 day call. It's better than trying to get along the stock at $400 a share. You're paying 14 or 15 points for some in the money calls, and you get a ride for 3 or 4 days, and that's really all. I think that's one way to play this. There's probably several ways to play it, but yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think broad stroke equities seem to be by and large overbought, not necessarily overvalued, but overbought. Because when you're looking at GDP at 5.5%, and you're talking about a huge change in the economy and in earnings. These
Well,
companies are going to earn like crazy.
what's fearful to me, and I think it's a lot of these comments from Carney are coming back around the Davos about the middle powers freezing the U.S. out. China, Canada making bilateral trade agreements with China, embracing Russia, and it's not just Canada. So we could be an island unto ourselves, and that 5% GDP number that we print today may not be that 5% GDP number that we print, at the end of the year because we might be isolated. I don't know. Trade policies swinging back and forth. I think our friends are getting a little frustrated that there's always you can be a bully for so long and then it doesn't work.
Well, you look like a bully, but if you've been getting shit on for years, don't forget we assumed a $70 billion trade deficit monthly for many years. It's not like trade flows were neutral. They were very heavily one-sided. And you look bad when you say, I've had enough. And you look like a bully, but they've been the bully, you know?
But it's not just that. It's changing the sanctions, changing trade policies. I think our friends. I go back to something, and you may remember it. I think it was Condi Rice that said it. She says it's very important for your enemies to know where you stand, but it's a lot more important for your friends to know where you stand. And right now, I don't know if our friends know where we stand. You know.
You think that's so, or you think they know where we stand and they don't like it?
Uh, probably a little. Probably you're probably right. Probably leaning that way. But even so, Canada to make trade agreements with China. That's
All right, let's talk about Canada. You're Carney, right? You're looking at two Canadas. I'm old enough to remember when the French separatists, really ripped Montreal and Toronto apart. Well, now you got a similar thing going on in Alberta. And the whole western half of Canada, the energy sector, they're talking about openly secession. They don't think their government's treating them right. And that's the side that Trump is playing to. Trump is playing to Western Canada. Now, Western Canada benefits tremendously from a deal for China because that fits China like a glove.
right.
In fact, Canada fits China like a glove because it's got two things that China desperately needs. Number one, it's got an energy producer. And number two, it's got a mature consumer market, right? But you take that consumer market and the production that drives it, right? You take their domestic economy. A lot of it is dependent on trade flows to the U.S. Their entire auto sector is built around selling to the U.S. And Trump is playing the tariff card there. So he weakens them in two directions. Number one, he plays to the Western provinces, and he weakens the consumer market. Now, I'm not saying that China's out in the cold, because Canada fits China like a glove.
Right.
their domestic consumption has been, or really their production selling to the consumer, the U.S. consumer, was the biggest piece of that. And Trump holds that card. Carney wasn't all that popular. Trump got him elected.
Yeah, he did. Yep, he did. You know, I don't know, but it's not just Carney. You know, the Europeans are getting frustrated. And I agree with your point that, you know, you've been shit on for 60, 70, 80 years, and you said, I've had enough, and your friends don't like it. You know, when you force people to make a change, nobody likes to make a change. And that's where we're at. And that's what we're at.
Well, yeah, but you understated that a little bit. We had an unsustainable position. We simply could not go forward with $70 billion a month trade deficits.
What happens if we become an outcast?
I don't think our consumer market will enable us to be an outcast. The world needs our consumer market. Trump is playing that card with tariffs, but the tariffs, it's just simply a gate that he opens and closes to get other concessions. See, that's where they look at Trump and they say, you know, he's fighting a trade war. No, he's using trade policy to extract defense contracts and other positions, geopolitical positions. I agree with you that it's very unsettling. And I think that's really what this current position we're in is. You throw that in with some insurrections in Minnesota and some other governors standing up saying, I've had enough. And it hits the dollar hard. And you know, and all this is coming before an election. So that's the wild card, you know, the mid-year election, because Trump's policies are gone if the Democrats take over. You know, the next 2 years, really, from this point 3 years, because we're talking about a year away from the election. But if the Democrats were to take over, look at where this country is. You know, you've got nothing but impeachment, and the whole agenda is on not only on hold,
So
but
where does that put the economy? Where does that put 5% GDP projections?
yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like flipping a coin, and I'm much.
How do you play the market when you're flipping coins? You buy vol, right?
Yeah,
And that's where we've been, and that's where we're consistently.
yeah, no doubt about it. But to me, the greatest fear, S&P was earlier this week was at 700, right? The SPY. Is the next move 800 or 600?
600.
Yeah. So to me, you buy the downside, sell the upside, and protect yourself. Because as you say, there are still a lot of good, healthy stocks that do foreign business, that are still going to do foreign business, that are going to be around forever, and you don't want to liquidate those. So you want to protect yourself for the rest of the 493 stocks that are going to go in the tank.
Well, we're talking about earnings, and I think they're set for the next 2 quarters, or at least the next quarter. So that die has been cast already, and it's going to take a big surge in unemployment to change that for the upcoming quarter. So I think over the next quarter, we're still going to see good numbers come out of companies. What you're talking about may or may not happen, but if it's going to happen, and you can make a strong argument that it's going to happen, I hear you, it's not going to happen for another quarter.
Okay, I'll grant you that.
So you take a short position, and you could be looking at ugly drawdowns for the next quarter. Either way, I think it's time to pull in your horns in both directions. Don't
It
get
really just
aggressive
scared me
either way.
the other day when gold had that massive rally. Euro got above 120. The DXY dollar index was down at 95 and change. I mean, everything seemed to unravel. And the move in gold was so violent. The move in silver has been violent. Gold has moved. Was it 500 points, $500 this month? Was it more than that? I think it was more than that. I think it was
Well,
like
in 2 days it moved 500 points up, and today I was looking, it was 250 down. I don't know where it
yeah,
is now.
yeah. It's something similar. It might be worse. To have a $1,200 move in gold in the course of 30 days, a 30% move, a 25% move in gold, people are just don't want to be in the dollar and don't want to be in the U.S. That's what that said to me. And I'm fearful of where that's going to lead to. And this is back and fill and this profit taking along the way in the dollar, in metals. But I'm
Okay,
just I'm
I'm going to
fearful
make
of
a point
stocks.
here, and it's not a point for retail investors. In fact, I doubt most retail investors would follow a lot of what I'm saying. But commodities markets, specifically futures markets and derivative markets, are very highly leveraged, and they require they require stable delivery processes. And what you're seeing driving gold from everything I've seen is central banks taking possession of the underlying.
Physical.
And that's the physical, yes. And that's unusual for these markets. You don't see this kind of short squeeze in the physicals very often.
So what's the reason that the central banks are taking physical gold out? They don't want to be in
Um,
the dollar. They don't trust the dollar. And to your earlier point is that they don't trust the political situation here with states in open revolt. That could be. They don't trust the trade policies. That could be. They don't trust the potential sanctions.
to your point, I don't think they trust a new Fed.
Yeah.
I think they're worried about inflation premiums picking up on the 2 year, the 10 year, the 30 year. They see this curve steepening. Maybe they think a new Fed's not going to pay any attention to inflation. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the '87 crash. Now, the '87 crash, markets were very comfortable with Volcker, and Greenspan was a new Fed chairman. And Volcker was the champion that defeated inflation. He was King George and the Dragon. And when Greenspan moved in, markets weren't comfortable with where that Fed was going to go. And I think I see parallels here. I think the market sees the new Kevin as a creature of the administration. He's going to push low rates down, and I think they're fearful of that. So all of these reasons that you raised, I think, are valid. But what we have now is a lack of confidence in a new Fed.
There's 2 points I'll add to that. One is maybe I'm a little bit skeptical, a little bit nervous, protective of the downside because I'm in the middle of reading Adam Sorkin's book, 1929, and where we were and where we're going. So my mindset is preoccupied there. But the second thing I'm going to say, when we talk about the Fed and the possibility of lowering rates, I guess it was about 3 or 4 years ago where we started to say, when is bad news bad news? Bad news used to be, oh, it's great, the Fed's going to ease. Yeah, it's great, we're going to give free money. Yeah, easy money. And then you're going to come to a point where bad news is, Fed's going to lower and the market's not going to react to that. They can't buy anymore. And I don't know if we're there yet. People,
We
the
saw
bulls,
that.
yeah, the bulls that
We
I
saw
talked
that
to
with the
said we're
previous
going there.
seasons. Yeah. We saw that when Powell we lost confidence in Powell, and he lowered rates twice, and the 10 year backed up on him right in his face. He stepped on a rake, basically. And I think the new Fed chair, no matter what he does, is seen as a creature of Trump, driving low rates down.
Right.
So maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but I think, we've talked about this. Their plan is to lower short rates and fund the debt on the short end of the curve.
Yeah, the Robert Rubin trade, as we talked
Yeah,
about
it's
before.
absolutely that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Fund because you got massive liquidity on the short end of the curve, and you lower rates, and you make the deficit look better because you're funding cheaper on the short end of the curve, and
It's a,
he suspends the 30-year or drastically reduces the 30-year and the 20-year and the 10-year auctions and moves everything into the lower end. I think that's the plan. And I don't think the market has addressed that or seen it. I
it's
think they're just
interesting
uncomfortable.
parallels because Rubin was a market guy at a
Yeah.
Citibank, right?
Right?
And now we have Besant as a market guy out of a hedge fund.
Yeah.
And both are looking as students of the market, practitioners in the market. They know what the
Yeah.
right way to manipulate this.
By the way, I think that's a good move. I think that's uh, he's done enough things on the inflation side if you listen to supply siders, everything great because they're watching the supply side market. We haven't seen supply siders in 40 years. So now we're looking at supply siders and it works, but most of the market doesn't feel that way. So what we're looking at is the inflation scare and the culture shock scare with insurrections, the governmental scare, the trade scare. We got a lot of scares going on here, and I think that's really what's driving these short-term volatility moves.
Yeah. Um, Once again, I can't disagree with that. There's a lot of scares. There's a lot of fear. Markets always run on fear and greed, and now we're in the fear side of it. We've been in the greed side of it for too
Yeah,
long.
I think you got to play it. You can't
Yeah,
fade it. It's too big to fade.
yeah. Um, so we've touched on the dollar. We've touched on the new Fed. We've touched on metals. We've touched on stocks. Where else do we go? What's the next wild
The
card?
election. We're at a point now where the Democrats are throwing so much money at making Trump look evil, making the supply side look evil. And Trump's plan is the numbers are going to speak for themselves. Oil is backed up on him, which hurts the price of gas, and he wants to see the price of gas at
At a dollar.
around $2.
Yeah, yeah. I just go back to the point that I've made so many times over. Until Congress can learn how to stop spending, there's still going to be a huge deficit problem, still going to be huge debt problems. And I know your point is 5% GDP makes that number look smaller on a percentage basis when you look at the overall economy. But the numbers, you have to have some degree of Congress of responsibility, fiscal responsibility, and they have no fiscal responsibility whatsoever. So I don't know how that's going to change ever, and that scares me as well.
Well, um, I agree with everything you've said. If you want Congress to stop spending, like Dad used to say, you're pissing on a flat rock. It's just not going to happen. So the only solution to it is grow the economy and shrink the debt relative to GDP. And you can do some interim solutions. Shrink the public sector, grow the private sector. That's happening. That's definitely happening. Um,
I saw something today where Trump he's appointed someone as the special prosecutor for governmental fraud, and he's looking into the whole process. He's looking at states like all the blue states. He's going to start with, of course. That's where he's got them at the end of his nose.
the
But
Doge trade.
yeah, yeah, with a prosecutor, with somebody who's prosecuted before, and push that envelope. And if we could do that and rein in some of this fraud, yeah, maybe there's a hope. Maybe there's some potential. But you may run into more of the same obstacles that have hindered this solution since what was the Tea Party, right? The Tea Party tried to do something similar. Rick Santelli
Yeah,
with CNBC, right? That
it's
was
been
totally
going on
wrong.
since the Gingrich trade when the Republicans took the House.
Right.
But something is happening that could really shake the confidence in the previous administration, the previous system. And it's going on in, I'm not sure if it's Minnesota or Georgia, but they're looking at the 2020 election.
Georgia, with Fulton County, they've subpoenaed some of the records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they've got him. And I saw, what's that lady's name? She was a Democrat, then became a Republican, ran for president from Hawaii. She was a representative.
Is it Maisie?
No. She's out of the government, right? Well, she's a
Oh yeah, I know who you.
DNI, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Tulsi Gabbard.
yeah. Tulsi.
She went there to look at this. Now, that's Director of National Intelligence, I think. She's DNI. And let me ask you, I mean, because I don't know what to think here, but let's assume, for a second, and I'm not sure it's going to happen, but let's assume for a second that they uncover and prove that the 2020 election was stolen. What does that do to the election, and what does that do for Trump?
Well, 40% of the country are going to believe it and scream and yell. 40% of the country is going to think it's a lie, it's fabricated, the evidence is not real, and 20% is going to scratch their head and saying, I don't know, I don't know who to trust. So I don't think anything's going to change.
Well, you know what?
I mean, I certainly hope it will. But
I'm looking at the videos over this weekend. I've been flying most of the week, so I've been traveling. I haven't seen a lot of stuff that I would normally look at. But this one video catches my eye. That guy, I forget his name, who got shot in Freddie. Yeah. I was looking at CNN, and they were talking about how, you'd want your daughter, this is the perfect guy, you'd want your daughter to, and then all of a sudden I see him kicking a car with a gun strapped to him and spitting on and saying, shoot me, right? And I wouldn't want my daughter to marry this guy, not the guy they were talking about. Got nothing to do with and I think that whole thing blew up in their face. That video was damning with respect to, you could say ICE was too aggressive, border guys shouldn't have been there, all of that. But something I said to you 2 weeks ago is we had a way of dealing with migrants, illegal migrants and the ones that had rap sheets. You went into the jail, you went and looked at them with handcuffs. They came out of the cell with handcuffs, and a guy walked them out with a new set of handcuffs, and we didn't have to hunt them down and confront them. We had the local
police were doing that. Yeah.
Local police were volunteering and helping them. They were going out and maintaining. But now, when you call off local police, you don't have them in crowd control. Now you got what looks like aggressors going out into the environment because the local police aren't doing their job. So we've seen that.
You touched on immigration, and both sides agree that there are laws, and both sides agree that they're not comfortable with the laws, and both sides have not been able to change the laws, the immigration laws, right? Whether it be amnesty, whether it be sponsoring individuals for work for a certain work visas.
Solid citizen.
Yeah.
A solid citizen.
And post a bond to let this person be here.
Yeah.
And you're responsible. Whatever the rule is, whatever the change is, do you think it's possible that all of this craziness that we've seen over these last, 6 months, but in reality the last 2 months, it's gone crazy here in Minnesota. Do you think it's possible that Congress can enact some immigration reform for the better, that they can come together, that cooler heads will prevail? Or
No, because they raise money on this issue. Both sides, but more so the Democrats, raise money on this dysfunctional position we have. And if you make it functional, you're taking that that source of revenue away.
Right. Sad.
Yeah, I think I told you that time. I know I mentioned this story so many times. I don't know if we've done it on a podcast, but when I used to do CNBC and Financial News Network, that time I met with the guy who was Reagan's former budget director, and he said, "What do you think the problem is?" And I said, "Look, I'm really reluctant to say because you've forgotten more about how things work than I'll ever know. I'm just a market guy." And he said, "Yeah, well, what do you think the problem is for the markets?" And I said, "Well, the problem is we elect lawyers, and they don't have to be good lawyers. As long as they know how to make a soundbite that makes them sound like statesmen, we vote for them. And we send them to Washington with a rule book and say, we're your constituents, look out for us, and read the rule book and use your lawyerly powers." And then we find out after they get there that we're not their constituents. Their constituents are the guys that gave them the money to make the sound bites. And I remember him looking at me saying, you don't even know how right you are. And these people are bought before they ever get to Congress. I mean, imagine somebody comes to you and saying, I like what you said on the podcast. I want you to run for representative. Like Mike, for example. And you say, all right, where the hell am I going to raise $15 million? And some guy shows up with a checkbook. How are you going to say no to that guy when you get in? You're bought before you ever get there. And that's a dysfunctional system, but I don't see it changing.
Right, we've tried so many times to change election reform, and they just find another loophole. Those lawyers find another loophole, a way around it.
Shakespeare. First, let's kill the lawyers. Right?
All right. Well,
Shakespeare was a black woman. Did you know that? Yeah. I didn't know that. Shakespeare was a black woman. That came out this weekend.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
She had a hell of a beard, though, I got to tell you.
Self-portraits were interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've touched on a couple of subjects here that I'm glad we finally got a chance to sit down over the past week. I'm glad you're back from your travels in sunny Florida. Yep. And it's still cold here in the Northeast, single digits. So
it's nice here in Florida. We 68 degree, I think.
Nice. Hit the golf course.
The iguana are starting to decompress.
Comfortably back in their trees. That's right. All right. Well, listen, you have a great afternoon.
Okay, you too, Frank.
We'll see you soon.